so let's get started with the basics of government contracting. All right, so there's this language, there's this game of GovCon, and I like to frame a lot of my lessons around sort of a key question. So our key question for the next little bit is going to be, why is the federal government such a unique and challenging buyer? It's a good question. It's a legitimate question, and there are some answers. Some of them are good, some not so good. You're not going to be completely satisfied with all the answers that I have, but it's a unique and challenging buyer. It's unlike anything that you'll encounter probably if you've just coming over from the private sector. Ooh, forgot about my polling question. Let me throw a poll up there real quick. I am curious, and I want everybody to vote if they can. Rate your experience in government contracting. By the way, this is the first time I've ever done a poll in Zoom, so I have no idea if this is going to work or not. But if you're out there, we got 18 of you. I'm curious, what is your experience in government contracting? Obviously, this is a Likert scale, 1 to 5, 1 being the least amount of experience, 5 being the most. I tried to frame it a little bit. So go ahead and vote. Hopefully you're able to vote. Can I get a participant letting us know? All right, so we got some voting in the chat. Leslie, not sure if you see the poll. No poll. I wonder, do you see it? Can you see it there? Strange. All right, well, let me see if we can work on that in a little bit. Yeah, no poll. Okay, darn it. Well, the poll is basically designed to get a sense for where everybody's at. So, Yanisa, I'm not sure if you can troubleshoot this for me for a minute while I go through some of these slides, but that's strange. It seems like you should be. Go to the bottom. Actually, everybody go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and pull up those controls and see if you see the polls. See if you see the polls feature there. We got somebody at a 4.5. That's great. Rebecca, there's a at the bottom of the screen, kind of looks like this. Pull it over. It's going to look like that. So if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should pull that up. You should be able to click right here. Hopefully that'll bring the poll question up. Live television, folks. Live television. Wait, what? Okay. I'm not going to let this poll snafu derail me. So, all right. So whatever experience you have, we're going to try to bring it up a little bit today. All right. Jason's at a 4. That's great. We all can see the screen, right? No. Yes. Okay. You can see my friend here. Who's yeah, okay. All right. Good. We're in good shape. We got the screen. Okay. So why is the government? Why is polling such a unique and challenging? No, I'm just kidding. Why is the government such a unique and challenging buyer? Let's move on. So one of the reasons is the money is spent a little differently. So if you've ever been in the private sector, if you work in a company now, you know your fiscal year is probably January to December, right? Well, in the government, we wanted to be difficult. We wanted to have a slightly different type of fiscal year. It starts in October and it ends in September. So you actually will see that, you know, in October is a brand new funding cycle. Traditionally, governments get their budget in October. They have to spend it all by September 30th. It's a use it or lose it thing. And basically, that's just the way the appropriations process works. As you know, Congress appropriates a discretionary budget for agencies to use on contracts for goods and services. They get it ideally, and ideally they get it in October, and they have until September to spend it. So the quarters go that way, and in September, you'll find that there's a surge in activity, right? Because if an agency doesn't spend their entire budget by the end of the fiscal year, they potentially lose it because Congress just has this impression, rightly or wrongly, that if you don't spend your entire budget in a year, that you obviously have too much money. So not sure if that's a perverse incentive or not. It's a lot of schools of thought there, but clearly, with the fiscal year ending in September and having to spend as much of your discretionary budget as possible so you don't lose it for the following year, lots of activity in September. So this changes how you're prospecting, right? So if we're in what's March right now, so we're almost at the end of the second quarter. Agencies, I think, just got their budget. I think the budget just got released recently. So agencies should have their discretionary budget. Now they've got 6 months to spend it. You're going to see a lot of activity. You should be prospecting, by the way, having conversations, meeting your customers in the fall, in that first quarter, trying to set up meetings, trying to understand what their requirements are looking like, trying to understand what problems agencies are going to need to be solving, positioning yourself so that when the second quarter and the third quarter come, you're on the radar. They know about you. They might include you in any pre-solicitation conferences. They might send you draft statements of work to get comment on. So those are very important months. It doesn't always track that way, but again, this is just sort of best practices here. So once we get into the third quarter, start to see some more activity, a little bit of a lull, July, August, although who knows, with the delays we're experiencing right now, it could be just full court press through the end of the year. But that's basically the government's calendar, different than what we see in the private sector. All right. So another reason it's different and a little bit more challenging is because of rules, regulations, and rigmarole, right? So there's risk aversion. In the government contracting professionals are not incentivized necessarily to change the game by assuming risk. Okay, so what we mean here is that uh, there's no financial incentive. For example, if a government contracting officer saves money on a contract, and in some cases, because of the use it or lose it I just discussed, there could be a little bit of a perverse incentive. So think about that. Actually having an issue where if you save too much money on your contract, you're just going to create an issue for your program because now they have to go and spend that money. Not saying it happens a lot, but that's, that actually is something to consider. So they're not incentivized to change the game, not incentivized to take a lot of risk. The cultural, legal, and political environments in the government market really do create a resistance to change. Now, there are some great contracting professionals, great program folks out there who flip this entirely on its head, take risks, do innovative things, and kudos to them. That's a real civil service mindset, and we appreciate it. But for the most part, the system is not designed to do it, but it becomes this way. A reduction in risk is always preferred over an increase in value, unfortunately. The process can wag the dog. That's the second reason the sales cycle is different. You've probably heard of the Federal Acquisition Regulation. It's a legal reference guide that establishes procurement rules and processes that agencies have to follow when they're releasing contracts. State and local have their own type of regulation, not always the same. Far kind of is the federal guidance. It requires fair opportunity and competition in contracting. Fair opportunity means that in almost every case, in most cases, companies have to have an opportunity to compete. That means that while you do see some sole source and some set aside contracts, for the most part, government contracts are competitive. They'll be put on the open market, and that can create issues, right? That can create issues with government receiving a lot of proposals that they have to review, from companies really spending a lot of time and effort chasing opportunities because they can really propose on anything they want. As long as they're registered in SAM, they can propose to be they can propose on a government contract and have an opportunity to win it. So competition creates feelings, it creates protests. Sometimes people feel that they should have won. Think about it. You spend weeks putting a proposal together, trying to understand something, trying to capture work, and then you're going to be told that you did not win because your proposal wasn't good enough. Sometimes people can't really accept that and they have to know more, and so they protest. So protests can be an issue. All right, so that's it. So fair opportunity, competition, and contracting, all this is driven by federal acquisition regulation, process-oriented environment. A third reason why the sales cycle is different is because of the people. So the buyers, right, the contracting officers, they're not always the decision makers. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But you typically have two different types of of groups in the contracting field. You got the contracting officer, they have the warrant. Only contracting officers, only warranted contracting officers are able to obligate the government. They sign the checks, only warranted contractors. So these people control the purse. But the program officers, those are the budget owners. Those are the individuals that are responsible for delivering the value, delivering the service. They're going to be the immediate beneficiary of the contracted goods and services, and then they obviously flow that down to the stakeholders or to the citizens or whoever is ultimately ultimately benefiting from the contract at the end of the day. So there is some degree of power struggle with the contracting officer attempting to be a good steward of the public trust, and the program officer attempting to get the goods and services that they need to really do what they're supposed to do with the mission. So the power dynamics are very important to understand. This is the inside baseball. When you get into government business development, you get into an office or you get into understanding and meeting people, kind of figuring out that power dynamic, who's in charge, who's calling the shots, where's the soft authority, becomes really important. Okay. So we're going to talk a lot about the personas coming up. It's a process driven market. And there's different processes. Like I could probably throw up another polling question here, and see how many different processes have you seen in the government? Because I mean, there's a traditional phase process that we're going to go through, but a lot of times, you just look at this as 4 different or 5 different process maps for effectively the same acquisition type of process. So depending on who you're marketing to, who you want to sell into, what agencies you want to do business with, you kind of have to understand their unique process. But hopefully in the next couple of slides, we'll give you a broad enough understanding of the government procurement process so you can adapt it as necessary. All right. So what is the government procurement process? Like I said, 4 phases. This is how I've always described it. 4 phases: planning, solicitation, award, and post-award. So what happens in planning? That's requirements definition. And what I mean by that is literally, what are we going to buy? The program office, identifies a need. Maybe it's services. Maybe they got to staff a call center. Maybe they got to buy some face masks or defibrillators, whatever it is. There's a requirement. And, sometimes that requirement can be a little difficult to define. Think about it. Easy if you're buying a car, well, sometimes, or buying equipment. If you're buying services, it can be a little bit more challenging to describe that. There's a lot of stakeholders. The larger the opportunity, the larger the expected contract value, the more stakeholders will get involved inside. So it's a challenge for government program professionals to kind of thread all those needles and come up with a requirement. But requirements definition is so important. We really hammer this in our government contractor, our training to the buyers, to the government folks. We say, look, requirements definition, not a more important phase. How do you develop requirements? How do you know what should go in that requirement? Market research is a big part of that. Market research is where, and you've done market research if you bought anything large, any kind of capital investment that you've purchased for your home or family, whether it's a car or a refrigerator, you've probably done some market research to understand what's out there. What are the features? What are the benefits? What are the trade-offs I might make? How much do these things cost? All this stuff is done in market research. We have a great tool at Public Spend Forum called GovShop that's basically a Google for government contractors. Okay, so government contractors, you want to have your profile on GovShop. So if our buyers are doing, and they are doing, market research in GovShop, looking for capabilities that you provide, you want to show up in those results. So that's market research. That's a big part of the planning phase. This is also, and I'm going to talk about this more in detail later, but during planning, this is when informal and open communication can occur. This is your best opportunity to sit down with program folks, to sit down with contracting professionals, to develop relationships, understand what they're buying, and inform requirements. Informing a requirement, there's no greater opportunity to put your company in better position than informing a requirement. All right. Solicitation, second phase. What happens in solicitation? This is literally when the buyer goes out and requests offers. So they can do this in a couple different ways. Requests for proposal, request for quotation. They can go to schedules, which are like large buying vehicles, basically, and they can request quotes from the vendors that have those vehicles. They can go full and open. Anybody in America, any company in America that can register with SAM and is authorized to do business with the government can respond to those requests for offers. They help to define a field of competition in solicitation. And what I mean by that is sometimes government contracting professionals can limit the field of competition. Excuse me, can limit the field of competition to socioeconomic status type companies. So they might say, look, we're only going to buy from small businesses, or we're only going to buy from women-owned small businesses. The solicitation will define the field of competition. So you need to read that solicitation very carefully. The last thing you want to do is spend time writing a proposal only to find out later that you weren't eligible to compete in the first place. The solicitation method, and I talk about it a lot, designing solicitations. It's such an important thing. Designing a good solicitation, a rock solid solicitation, saves everybody time. Saves everybody time. It's helpful for the contracting professional inside of government to understand and to get the best possible proposals that they can get, right? Think about it. It's not going to be easy to evaluate 10 proposals from 10 different companies if your instructions to those companies weren't clear. You don't want to read 10 different volumes, all different, and try to make an assessment of who's the best, the best company out there. So solicitation design, super important. When you read this, there's sections that you want to read. And that's why I really encourage everybody to make sure you're here at 2:00. 3:00. We'll be here at 2:00. We'll be here at 3:00 too, 3 p.m. Eastern time. That's when the Pulse of Government Contracting is going to come on and shred that solicitation, tell you exactly what you need to be looking for, how to read it so that you can write a good proposal. All right, the award phase. That's number 3 on our little progression here. What happens in contract award? Well, a lot, frankly. And it can be a really long phase. Like I said earlier, if you get 10 proposals manageable. Sometimes you get 50 proposals. Depends on how big your award opportunity is. Now we saw it definitely within the past decade, a growth in really large vehicle contracting, big multi-agency vehicles, huge dollar, like billion-dollar ceilings, would get 30 to 40 contractors on this schedule. And then these takes forever to evaluate. They often get litigated and protests. So the award phase can be really long, can be a real cost driver. What I mean by that is if you submit a proposal as a contracting company, and you got to wait 3 months for a decision to be made, what are you going to do with the staff that you've committed to this? What are you going to do with the products that you ideally will sell if you are awarded the contract? So it can drive costs. You probably will not hear much from the government contracting professionals during this time. They do not communicate informally, definitely. There's no informal communication. If there is communication, it's very formal, usually written, usually done in a very formal way, because it's not like government contracting professionals can just have a conversation with one vendor and not another. That wouldn't be fair in public contracting. That would not be fair unless they did it by the books. So you're not going to hear much. You're going to be sitting around and, it's crazy because you've spent 2 or 3 weeks hustling to get this proposal done, maxing out, getting everybody in your team. You write the proposal, you submit it, and then it's like a hurry up and wait game. 3 months later, you're going to hear something. So it's just part of the deal. Got to be ready for it. Post-award. What happens in the post-award phase? Well, this is delivery. Hopefully you get to this phase. Hopefully this class will help you get to this phase. This is when you're delivering performance. You're shipping the product. You're staffing the contract. You're doing whatever you need to do. You need to be thinking about what's next. If this is something the government buys often, do you have options in your contracts? Are you able to renew anything that you're doing? You want to make sure you have an opportunity to do that follow-on work. Also, you're in the building. If you're in the building this is the best place to develop other opportunities. Now, I'm not saying you should go and solicit other people, in the government, ask them what they need, but you need to be developing relationships. You need to be listening. You need to be listening. You're in that kitchen, in that commons area, keep your ears open, right? You could be hearing about other opportunities. You could be meeting people. You're in the building, you have the badge. Look for corollary opportunities. Become indispensable to your agency and your customers. Figure out who is really getting the work done, who's got the soft power, who's got the authority. Become indispensable to them. This is critical if you're a service provider. Become indispensable, and they'll find a way to keep working with you. Okay? You need to also, and this is really important, I definitely want to underline this, you need to be working with your client on the past performance record. Okay, that is super important. That is probably one of the best. If this is your first contract, or your second or your third, past performance is really important to winning new work. So make sure you're documenting what you're doing, document any good feedback you get, because towards the end of the, because they're not doing it, the government probably not doing it. The end of the contract, you're gonna say, hey, can you give me a past performance record? They're gonna say, sure, send me some bullets, send me kind of an outline of what you did. You'll be glad you were documenting all this stuff as you go. And then they're gonna write a really good past performance record for you, assuming you delivered, right? We're all gonna deliver. I'm not gonna worry about that. Everybody on this call is gonna deliver excellent service for their government customers. So get that past performance record, be on that radar. Okay, so I talked about earlier sort of how you're developing business differently in the federal government, in the public sector. So you got to develop business within the rules. This is an important chart. And it's important because we want you to understand how communications change as you move through the procurement life cycle. So there on the bottom, you see that orange arrow. That's the planning, solicitation, award, and post-award. So the communications do change. When you're in the planning section, that's what I like to call the informing period. This is when discussions are going to be the most open, when the requirements are going to be defined, and when acquisition professionals are going to be determining the procurement strategy. Okay, so this is really an important time. If you have an opportunity to speak with government professionals, don't sell. Try to provide information that will help them. Your sort of, best practices, your, incredible service delivery, all these things, government contracting professionals are hearing that from everybody. Your opportunity in the informing period is to try to make their lives easier. Share a white paper, share an article, share something that's relevant. I think in the process of business development, if you're not reading as much about your agency as you can, and I mean everything from the IG reports to any testimony that the agency leaders have given, you're not doing your diligence, because you're going to have to start connecting the dots. So in this informing period, provide helpful information as much as you can to the contracting professionals. Because once that solicitation gets released, that's the quiet period. Okay. If there's any communications at all here, it's going to be formal, and it may cease entirely. What I mean by formal is, so once that solicitation goes out, a lot of times the solicitation will include a period for questions and answers. Might be a week, might be 2 weeks after the solicitation is released, but that's really your only chance to communicate again, is to submit a list of QAs that are going to ultimately be answered and come back to you. And by the way, when they put that QA together, it's published. So just be mindful of that. You don't want to put anything like proprietary in your answers, or in your questions, I mean. So that's your opportunity. Submit questions, government answers those back. That's the quiet period, from solicitation all the way through award. After the award is made, then it's delivery. Communications are going to start to open back up if you win, and I hope you do. But they shift away from prospecting and into performance, right? And delivery. So if you're lucky and you win and you're delivering, congratulations, you're in the post-award phase. Whole nother set of issues and challenges to work through, but that's beyond our scope. All right, let's talk about how government buyers consider and select vendors for their contracting needs, because our key question now is, how are you going to change your communication, prospecting, and sales behavior to better reflect the unique requirements of the government procurement process? Let me pause for a second and just see, if there's any questions. I don't want to throw too much out there, but I do want to know if there are questions coming. So, I mean, has anybody out there communicated with somebody in government? Has anybody out there tried something that didn't work? Let us know in the chat. Let us know in the comments if you can, and I'll continue to read through some of these slides. So how are you going to change your communication and sales behavior to reflect these requirements? Well, again, the basics of government decision making in the solicitation. That's where your proposal or offer strategy is going to be informed. So your proposal, what you submit to the government, that's informed entirely by the solicitation. So read it. Um, yeah, that's kind of my number one critical lesson there. It's crucial to understand how the government intends to buy your items. So if you don't understand how they're going to buy your items or your services, you're not going to be able to make an acceptable offer. Here we go. Here comes a chat. Um, Yeah, so somebody's saying it's just more challenging than ever to communicate with government buyers. I mean, absolutely. I don't have an answer for that. I mean, you got to go where they are, right? Join NCMA, join the NCMA, National Contracts Management Association. Join ACT-IAC. You know, that's an opportunity to interface through working groups with government professionals. Be cognizant that they're always getting sold, right? So if you can just be friendly, be helpful, be an advocate for whatever it is they're doing, that's going to go a lot longer than just sort of saying, hey, can I get time on your calendar to tell you about my product or service? That's just not gonna fly. And if it does, congratulations. So crucial to understand how the government intends to buy your items. When the pulse comes on later this afternoon at 3 o'clock, we're really going to dive deep on this. It's going to be a good session. Um, all right, so there's instructions in the solicitation, and those are informed by the evaluation factors, and that's sort of something that's put together by the procurement office, and they're used to make a contract award. So think about sort of the evaluation criteria, like if you were buying a car, it'd be like SUV versus a coupe, or like number of seats. These are evaluation criteria. No secret there. Paying attention to my chat. Yep, thanks, Unisa. That's a great resource. Appreciate you putting that out. Okay, so that's the basics of government decision making. Hopefully that's clear by now. But now I want to start talking about sort of who is who and what do they do? What do the people do in government? And it's a good question. So there's three types of government prospects: requirements owners, influencers, and acquisition professionals. Let's go through each one. Catch my breath. All right, the requirements owner. So like I said earlier, this is sort of the individual that has the need for the product or solution that's being provided. They represent the program. They may represent the budget. They represent the business. Okay, these are the individuals who are tasked with delivery, and so they got a tough job. And imagine that. Imagine being responsible for a program or a mission element, and having a budget and not being able to spend that on whatever company you think is best. That's welcome to the government. That's it in a nutshell. You have the money, you have the mandate, but you can't just hire anyone that you want. You have to go through the procurement process. It's crazy. Not crazy. No, it's not crazy. It's the way it is. Okay. It's the arm's length sort of relationship between requirements owners and government contracting professionals. So these individuals, these requirements owners, they can have significant influence on the contracting officers. And a lot of times I had great relationships with my program folks because I understood their challenges. They understood what we wanted to do. We were symbiotic. I needed to deliver for my client, my customer, when I was a contracting officer. That was a requirements owner. So they can have a lot of influence. They can have sometimes not much influence. They can be new. They can be finding their way. So you need to understand, again, this is why I'm spending the time here, because not every person, not every one of these personas is going to be the same case by case. Okay, so that's the requirements owner. Boy, I just fast forwarded real fast, didn't I? Oh gosh. Okay, got it. Okay. So the second type of prospect I want to talk about, this is the influencer. The influencer tends to be a mid or senior level manager in government. It can be a political appointee as well with a specific mandate and a limited tenure. But ultimately, these individuals tend to have authority to approve budget requests or they're setting buying strategies. So, program person here, influencer kind of here on top. Neither of them can sign the checks. Neither of them can award the contracts. That's still up to the contracting officer. So these individuals can be very powerful people in the sense that they set the priorities. The program owners and the requirements owners will report to these individuals, but these individuals don't do a lot of work. So here's a classic story that we see happen a lot. So, you know, your company, you're developing relationships, you're at a conference and you meet some high level, high ranking government official and you think, awesome, here I am. I'm gonna impress this person. I'm gonna get their card. Maybe they agree to go meet you for coffee after, and you're getting this great vibe, like, oh, finally, I've met the senior person. They're gonna pave the way for me. Not always that way, because, like I said, they can't control exactly what the contracting process will yield. They can influence it, but the reason I'm saying this is because, just generally speaking, developing business in the government, developing business in general, it's a lot of emotional stress. There's a lot of feelings of like euphoria, like, oh my gosh, I've finally figured it out. This is going to happen now. And a lot of feelings of just stress. It's not going to happen. Like, I don't know when we're going to get something. And so when you meet an influencer, they might make you feel really, really good. You might go home and tell your significant other or your roommate, like, hey, I had this awesome meeting today, and it was with this person, and they're gonna open the doors. Maybe they will. Don't give up. I'm just saying, be prepared that these people can't always do, what they even think they may do. Because if they're political appointees and they're in for a certain period of time, they might not even understand the government process. They might be out there just glad handing, networking, trying to connect with people. So it's hard to know, but you certainly shouldn't ignore these people. My recommendation from them is understand what's keeping them up at night. If it's an appointee, what is it that they're there to do? And how is that ultimately going to trickle down to the program folks that you know or the contracting folks that you know? Because ideally, your company has a product or service that can deliver on that challenge. Okay. All right, let's get to the third type of prospect, the acquisition professional. These are career civil servants, and they are involved in the big A process of acquisition. They are, contracting officers or program managers that report to the program owner in the case of a project manager, or the contracting officer that reports to some type of division director who might then report to like a head of contracting activity. These are the people that sort of they're the gears. They're the gears in the wheel, right? They're responsible for the many process-oriented decisions that get made, and they're beholden to the federal acquisition regulation, to any agency policies or procedures that are relevant to what they're buying. They, I don't like the term, but they do check the box, right? They're sort of box checkers. Now, a lot of them think outside the box, especially now. But you will find some that are, really just by the book, and they do the things that they want to do the way they want to do it or the way they've done it in the past, and they're not very flexible. It's a wide range of people that you'll meet in this stage, but understand the type of person, the type of acquisition professional you're meeting with, and know that they're typically only going to meet with vendors in formal sessions. And typically, once the solicitation gets released, you don't see much of them because they're back there doing the work. They're evaluating the proposals. They're dealing with all of that. So again, the contracting officers, warranted contracting officers, sign the checks. When I was a contracting officer, I had contract specialists that worked under me that could do a lot of the work, right? They might bring me a market research report. They might bring me a solicitation, but they weren't able to sign the contracts. Only I was. And I didn't have a huge warrant or anything like that, but But I could sign the contracts, and there's a lot of, a lot of responsibility that comes with that. It was not, I remember signing my first contract. I think it was only for like $150,000, only for $150,000, $150,000, just being terrified, but also feeling an incredible sense of pride in being able to do that. So those are our three prospects. Now, how do we communicate with them? This is important. How do we communicate with these government prospects? Our requirements owners, we can use the standard prospecting techniques here. These individuals might and are more likely to go and meet with vendors, and they want to know about your sales process. They want to know sort of, okay, if I do like you as a company, if I like what you're selling, how would I ultimately be able to get to you? You want to align your messages with the policies and priorities of the agency or mission, right? So this is where I say, you need to be getting smart about the agency that you're selling into. You need to be smart about the challenges that they have. So read the GAO reports, read the Inspector General report. GAO, of course, is the Government Accountability Office. Basically, they write reports on, all things government, especially, unfortunately, bad things. So if an agency has just had a GAO report come out and it was, maybe negative, that usually can lead to opportunities for companies to come in and help improve that. So you want to read the GAO reports. You want to read the Inspector General reports. This is the type of thing that informs leadership priorities. Read the president's budget requests. Read the budget that your agency receives. Understand where their priorities are. I like to say, if you do find yourself in a building and in an elevator with somebody that you want to impress, are you going to be able to talk about what's on their mind? Or are you going to be able to talk about your particular capabilities? Because I can tell you that's just going to fall on deaf ears. When you meet with a requirement owner, you want to come prepared with an answer. If they ask how they can buy you. And what I mean by that is they might say, okay, yes, I'm interested in your services. I'm interested in your software. How could I get to you? What channels do you have? And by this, they mean, are you on GSA schedules? Are you on, if I work for NASA, are you on this NASA SEWP vehicle? SEWP, it's SEWP. Are you on one of my agency's big vehicles so I can order from you? And so if you're not really clear on what contract channels mean, we have some great resources on publicspendforum.net, and I'll try to pull some of those together for our post event email. But go into your GovShop profile, and if you haven't created one already, this will help you understand what these channels are, because there's a section in our GovShop profiles which can walk you through sort of the contracts that you have, and opportunities that you have for agencies to buy you. They might also want to know sort of what's your socioeconomic status. I talked earlier, I mentioned a woman-owned small business, right? Or an 8A firm, or a service-disabled veteran-owned small business. If you qualify under one of these designations, then you might have an opportunity to get in with a little less competition than you might otherwise. So be prepared to answer a question of, where could I buy you, or how can we get you involved in the process? You want to be prepared with that answer. Okay, pardon me. So with influencers, I think my first bullet is almost, kind of want to walk that back. Not always difficult to formally engage. These people are active networkers. So while they'll probably talk to you at any event that you can catch them, sometimes they'll have you in for meetings. These individuals are sort of charged with learning about what's out there. But like I said, they're not typically involved in the decisions around individual contracts. So probably doesn't do a lot of good to talk specifically about, things that you deliver. You want to understand for as much as possible what's on these individuals' minds, especially if it's a political appointee. What are they trying to accomplish in their short tenure? And if you've done your homework, you should know who these people are in your agency. Understand and appeal to their broader strategic objectives. What is it? Are they trying to improve transparency? Are they big into cross-functional collaboration? Are they there to make digital services better in their agency? Try to understand who these people are. When you're prospecting, You've all probably seen like crime shows, right? Where you've got the cork board, and there's all the people and they're mapped around. Like this is kind of what an agency might look like, because while there's an org chart, if you can find it, the power dynamics are just completely random, and it just based on who's got the most pull, who's got the soft power, who's got the actual like formal authority. Try to understand like what that looks like. What does that power map look like? All right, then my acquisition professionals, you're going to want to approach them with caution. So what I mean by that is treat them, kind of formally. Address them as Mr. or Mrs. until they, ask you to do differently. They are standoffish because they're afraid that if you tell them something that could potentially divulge business proprietary information, that they may be on the hook for disclosing it in some way. They want to be careful when they're speaking to you because they don't want to give you an unfair competitive advantage, and that's understandable. So don't talk a lot about your competitors. Focus on your solution if you can, but primarily spend all of your time asking questions. You want to know about the solicitation. Like, okay, so, what are you thinking? Is this going to be full and open? Are you getting pressure from the small business advocate to set this aside? Do you think this is going to be competed on the open market, or do you see this going, through a strategic acquisition off of an existing schedule? Try to understand that. You want to understand what the solicitation method's going to be, because the acquisition professional ultimately won't have a lot of say in, let's make sure these vendors get included. While they will in market research, the program folks, are going to be the ones that are ultimately making, the decision, having to live with the contract that gets awarded. So you can kind of avoid the hard sell and focus on understanding the process challenges that they're facing and the elements of their eventual acquisition plan. Okay, we've got about 20 minutes left in this basic section. I need a drink of water, pardon me. How's it going so far? This is interesting. So I have no idea if people are out there zoning in or zoning out. If I was in the classroom, I'd have asked about 5 different questions by now. This is definitely a little harder than I thought it might be. Here comes a chat. Let's see what's going on in the chat. McGumbledon. I bet that's not your real name, McGumbledon, but it's my favorite new nickname. Thanks for the affirmation there. We want to know sort of what's on your mind, and I'm happy to shift gears and talk about stuff this afternoon if it makes sense. But I did want to sort of close things out today with a run through of some of the common mistakes that government contractors make, because if I can keep you from making these, I'm going to save you some time and save you some effort. It is St. Patrick's Day. All right. Okay. The first mistake, and I think Unisa, when you get a chance, could you put the blog in here? And no need to jump ahead. I'm going to hit all the highlights, but we do have a great blog on these mistakes that new vendors will often make. So I'm going to go through these one by one, the 7 deadly sins of government contracting. All right, number 1, an over-reliance on a socioeconomic designation. What does that mean? Well, the government, federal government especially, has small business goals that they have to meet every year. And it's generally about 20% of their budget, their discretionary budget, needs to go to the small business community, which is good. We like that. Economic development, give money to small businesses, turn them into large businesses, turn them into big hires. Want a lot of labor out there. But these small businesses are also broken down further into socioeconomic business concerns, right? So you have veteran-owned small businesses, service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses, women-owned small businesses, 8A companies, Alaskan-owned companies, small disadvantaged businesses. I think that's it. I don't think I'm leaving anything out. But it's not a panacea. Just because you have your woman-owned small business designation doesn't mean you're going to waltz in and win a contract right away. It's a good chance that you're going to have maybe less competition, but it's not uncompetitive, because It's kind of like trying to time the market. The analysts already know, right? So there's been a lot of companies out there that have already known about this. If you're new to the market, you're not going to be the first woman-owned small business. You're not going to be the first service-disabled veteran-owned small business to compete for this, $500 million in government spending every year. So get it. Absolutely go and get it. If you can qualify for it, you need to have it, but don't over rely on it. Okay. And know that sometimes agencies can have already met their socioeconomic goals in certain categories. So, if you're a WASB, woman-owned small business, that's great. But, unless the agency still needs to meet their contract spend goals in that category, they might be focusing on other things, right? So even though there's less competition, it's not uncompetitive. You're going to get other proposals from other woman-owned small businesses for that work. Now, you might be saying, but Frank, I've heard you can get sole source contracts if you're a specific socioeconomic designation. You can sometimes under simplified acquisition procedures. Sometimes you can qualify for a sole source contract. That's why I say get your socioeconomic designation if you qualify, but just don't over rely on it.
Frank, before you move on, we do have a quick question from the chat.
Yes. Okay. Talk about how KOs can buy your goods and services. Do you recommend still trying to get on GSA schedules with the movement towards BICs, the best in class contracts? Should we get on GSA schedules? It's a great question. It's almost like you might have read my blog, because that's our second mistake. Now, again, so this is not a mistake to get on GSA schedules. It's not. But if you don't fully understand why you're trying to get on a GSA schedule, then you might want to slow your roll a little bit, because they're costly. They're time consuming. They take 6 months to fill out the solicitation, to navigate all these things, to actually get a spot on the schedule. And if Ben were on, he could tell us this great anecdote. I'll try to do it justice. But, effectively, Ben talks about being in, when he was an Army contracting officer, having a company come to him and say, "Hey, Ben," I'm sure they called him Mr. McMartin or something like that, Mr. Egghead or whatever it was he was going by back then. He said, "Hey, Mr. Ben, I've got my I've got my GSA schedule. I'm on the GSA schedules." And Ben said, "Well, that's cool, but I don't buy off GSA schedules." So that company had spent a lot of time and effort getting on GSA schedules, thinking that it was going to let Ben access them easier, when in fact Ben's agency didn't even really use GSA for the particular things that they're buying. Okay. So if your agency does buy, but on the other hand, if your agency does buy a lot on GSA schedules, then yeah, you probably want to get on there eventually. But understand that you have to sell a certain amount. There's definitely a minimum amount that you have to sell and win on it just to retain your GSA schedule. You have to be aware of the most favored customer pricing clause. I don't want to get into that too much, because that's just basically means if you should offer your lowest rates on GSA schedule. If you've issued a rate that's the lowest that you've ever issued, you're supposed to reflect that in your GSA schedule pricing. So that can be challenging for sometimes. Next, and to close this out, getting a GSA schedule comes with $0. You don't get money when you get on schedule. It's a hunting license. So once you do spend all that time and effort getting on the schedule, then you're in the game reserve, so to speak. Then you can go out and try to develop business. So just be aware of what GSA schedules require. So McGumble then says, oftentimes small businesses don't have the past performance to be competitive for best in class contracts. So how do you approach that? Team, find a prime contractor. You probably, if you're a small company, you don't have a lot of government past performance, it's going to be difficult to go right after these really large, vehicle-based purchases. Sometimes maybe just be unrealistic to be considered for those. So definitely look for teaming partners. Use a service like GovMates, which is a great way to connect, with primes that might be looking for your particular niche that you service. But if you do have a little bit of a track record of past performance, you may be able to compete. Like HCATS, the huge human capital contract that OMB or OFPP put out a little while ago, had like some specific buckets reserved for small businesses. So, if that best in class contract has a small business set aside component, be aware of that. And that might be where you can play. Okay. All right. Oh, our third mistake is spray and pray capture management. Okay. Spray and pray capture management. That basically means an approach to developing business whereby I say, if I just submit 10 proposals, I'll win one. The odds are that I'll win one. Well, that's not often the odds. Companies do this, especially mid-level, sort of mid-tier contractors, companies that are in that middle tier of, not quite big and definitely not small anymore. This becomes a little bit more, more of an issue. They do have to put in, a number of proposals in order to earn one. But if you're new, and you're just getting started, it's the numbers game comes with some great opportunity costs, namely just churn and burn. I mean, you're going to spend a lot of time writing proposals and submitting proposals, and you're probably not going to win them. And it's going to be dramatic. It's going to be, it's going to hurt your feelings. It's going to hurt your typing hands. Get that carpal tunnel ready. It's good to hone your proposal skills, but just be mindful of how it's going to impact your staff. You're better off being really focused and realistic on what you can do and going after opportunities that, you maybe had been tracking for a while, or go after opportunities that are in a specific agency that you've strategically identified for your business. Don't just go on FBO, or the now it's betasam.gov, FBO or whatever, and pull down a bunch of solicitations that match one keyword and just start going. That's just nothing is going to come out of that, except for sadness. Okay. Our next mistake. This is what I've called the vanilla ice paradox. If you have a problem, I will solve it. Not good. You got to be realistic about your capabilities, right? So everybody out there thinks they're the best program management company, or thinks they have the best staff, or thinks they have the best industry practices. It's, unless you're like a large systems integrator like Accenture, or like a Booz Allen Hamilton, you probably can't solve every single problem that your customer has. So don't be unrealistic. Don't be, we'll take care of everything, customer service oriented type. I mean, I get it. I get the ambition, but it's not a good way to go. It's going to demonstrate too that you really don't understand your product market fit. And product market fit and sort of differentiating your company, something we're going to talk about at around, I think it's like 1:45 when we come back from our break. It's going to dilute your key capabilities and differentiators. Let's say you do win one of those contracts, just out of the blue, you do win one of these things. Now you've got to pivot and you got to shift and focus on delivering that. And if that takes you away from something that you were really doubling down on, really investing in, the opportunity cost of not continuing to do that might be greater than the money that you're going to get to just service that contract. It's also, I think, an issue where, if you're not focused on a niche delivery, if you don't know exactly what you want to do, it can make it more difficult for a subcontractor, for a prime vendor to appreciate what you do and how you would plug into a team. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. So don't be a vanilla ice. Focus on a particular, I think Vanilla Ice is kind of making a bit of a comeback. He's got like a home improvement show now. I always thought he was good. But try to hone in on your capability. I think this is the fourth lesson now, or the fifth lesson. The fifth mistake that you don't want to do is the mistake that you could make is not understanding how your target agencies buy, and by not researching their buying habits. This is a callback to the GSA schedules, right? Going after a GSA schedule when they don't use a GSA schedule. On the other hand, there are certain agencies that exclusively use GSA schedules. So if you sell medical products or medical services and you want to sell it to the Department of Veterans Affairs, I got news for you. They can only buy that off their federal supply schedule. So you got to understand how your agency buys. They might have existing vehicles. I mentioned NASA SEWP, SEWP. I'm getting hungry for soup. NASA SEWP is a existing vehicle for software products that NASA uses and other agencies can use to buy software products. Oasis is another one. It's a big existing vehicle. These IDIQ type contracts, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts, do have on ramps and off ramps. So, pay attention to that. And it's also really neat because you can see prior awards. You can see sometimes what's been awarded on those contracts, see what types of what methods they use, fixed price, etc. What are they doing? How do they award on that? So understand how your agencies buy by researching their buying habits. Last big mistake is not reading the solicitations or contracts and following the instructions precisely. Okay, I used to think when I got out of government and I went to PricewaterhouseCoopers, the management consulting firm, we were in their Washington federal practice, I was convinced that I could just write a great proposal and make it sound awesome and put all the right charts in there and just write it. I was a good writer. I thought I could do this, write a really nice proposal and win, and it's just not the case. This is a compliance exercise, okay? It is not a creative writing exercise. If it were, we'd have a lot of English majors winning tons of government contracts. It's a compliance exercise. You don't give the evaluators who've probably never heard of you or even know your company a reason to eliminate your proposal by not doing exactly what they say. If they say it's 10 pages, it's 10 pages. It's not 10 pages plus a table of contents. 10 pages. So you've got to read the contract. I mentioned this a bunch of times now, but at 3 p.m., we're going to have our friends Amber and Lisa from the Pulse of Government Contracting. They're going to come in. They're going to run through a solicitation and show you precisely how you need to be reading these so that you can put a compliant proposal together. Don't spend time writing a good proposal only to find out at the end that there was some certification in there or some requirement that you missed that renders you ineligible for award. You're not going to be a popular person if that happens to you. Magumbi, do agencies put this information on their website? Yeah, no, sort of. I mean, it depends. That's my favorite answer in public contracting. How they buy. So they're going to, typically they're not going to put like, we only buy this way or we only buy that way. You're going to have to do a little research. You're going to have to go into the, beta.sam.gov and look and see how agencies have typically, made their awards. And so you can find their award announcements and you can find their contracts, online. You can FOIA these things, and sometimes they have been FOIA'd. You can go to USA Spending and see, what types of spending they're doing. So there's a lot of different ways that you can research and find out how agencies buy. In my opinion, the best way is going and pulling down some of their past solicitations to understand, what constructs and what mechanics they're using. So that's something that the Pulse of Government Contracting, by the way, could really help with their proposal and development experts, business development experts. They can really help there. So, okay, so those are the 7 mistakes that you want to avoid. Unisa published or posted the link to that in the comments. And that's the end of our basics session. We're going to come back at 3:45 for a little bit deeper description of what you need to do to develop business. So I'm going to let Classic One take us out, and I'll see you guys in about 45.